by the chairman and ranking member of the full committee. The chairman has waived his opening statement, so he will be asking questions later, but the ranking member, Ms. Waters from California, has requested a minute, so she's recognized at this point for a statement for 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Mr. Luetkemeyer. I do have a question that I would like to raise at this point. Let me first thank. Okay, all right, then we'll do the opening statement. The trafficking of fentanyl and other drugs poses a significant public problem concern all across the United States. In Los Angeles County alone, the number of deaths tied to fentanyl overdoses has skyrocketed, with more than 13 times as many deaths in 2021 as there were 5 years prior. Unfortunately, Black and brown communities are all too familiar with the effects of drug epidemics on their communities. And I hope that the same attention being paid to communities harmed by fentanyl will be paid to the communities hit by other drug epidemics, including crack cocaine. I also hope that this committee rejects efforts by extreme Republicans in Congress bent on slashing the budgets of the Treasury Department agencies like FinCEN and OFAC, tasked with countering the trafficking of illicit drugs like fentanyl. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. With that, I want to thank the witnesses this morning for your compelling testimony, and we will enter now into the questioning period. I will recognize myself for 5 minutes. You know, the purpose of this subcommittee is to look at illicit financing and the money laundering going on around the world, and this, obviously, this morning, this hearing is with regards to the fentanyl scourge that is affecting our country and our people, our citizens. And so the question is, how can we minimize that? How can we stop the financial flow to damage this industry? So Mr. Gellner, I'd like to start with you because you start at the ground level with the local folks. What do you see as the way that the money is trafficked from the local dealer on the corner through to the cartels?
So most often it's trafficked in large bundles headed south towards the southwest border, right? So each of the cartels owns and operates at our southwest border crossings. And the major amount of violence coming out of Mexico is fights by the cartels over the control of those ports of entry into the United States. The flow of drugs and illegal immigration going north, and the flow of guns and money going south. With the advent of Chinese money launderers, however, they're able to orchestrate the movement of money into the hands of Chinese oligarchs who can then use those U.S. greenbacks to purchase land in the United States, real estate. They can place individuals into our higher learning centers and pay cash for that in U.S. greenbacks that they cannot get in China. They can do that at a cost savings to the Mexican drug cartels, who were one time paying anywhere from 15% to 20% on the dollar to Colombian money launderers, can now pay 1% to 2% to Chinese.
Thank you, Mr. Grellner. One of the things that we've seen, and then yesterday or day before in the Washington Times, I believe it is here, there was an article about border security as national security, and there's a comment made in here that unfortunately Mr. Lopez Obrador, who is the president of Mexico, has ceded estimated 35% to 45% of Mexican territory to cartel sovereignty. And rather than trying to work with us here in the United States, he's claiming that fentanyl is not produced in Mexico. And so my question is, we see that the border is porous, the drugs are coming across. How do we stop this flow of money going around to pay for all this? I want to ask Professor Realio first here, how do you affect the flow of this? You had a couple of comments about this. And then comment on ways to deter this, for instance, like seizing assets, sanctions. Are these some tools in our toolbox as Congress and we need to be using? And if so, how would you see that working out?
That's a great question. I was just in Mexico last week. I head to Guatemala on Monday, where, by the way, they've just done the first big illicit fentanyl bust, including the Mexican cartels, thanks to our colleagues at the DEA. So a little bit of a triumph there. In Mexico, we were doing very well in the past couple of years. following the money. I personally have trained several hundreds of the analysts, as well as in the law enforcement and in the military, trying to follow and use what we call actionable financial intelligence. And more importantly, the real problem, and I hate to say it, is the lack of political will by our counterparts at the highest levels of government in Mexico. I've been working in Mexico for 10 years, and more importantly, going fairly regularly. When we can demonstrate that the problem is theirs as well as ours, which unfortunately we have not convinced President Lopez Obrador that this is the case. 2 weeks ago, he blamed us for the fentanyl crisis, and just a few days ago, he blamed our parenting as the cause of the consumption. We recognize we have to reduce demand, but the supply is definitely coming from them. What's interesting is that we're seeing now, in terms of new methods, the start of the use of cryptocurrencies, particularly by the Jalisco cartel. They're paying young Mexicans to open virtual wallets that are then used to upload the dollars on the US side and then download in pesos, which totally avoids US dollar controls.
Thank you for that. Mr. Cassera, I like your comments on that. You specialize in financial crime, illicit finance. Tell us what we can do. Are seizure of assets, is that a way to deter folks? Is that just going to shift things around the world? How do we disrupt this financial flow?
It's an excellent question and something that many of us have been struggling with for years. If you look at what I call the metrics that matter when it comes to money laundering enforcement, as far as arrests, successful prosecutions, convictions, and money assets that are actually forfeited to the government, as a colleague of mine, Raymond Baker, head of Global Financial Security, said, we are a decimal point away from total failure. If you compare what we're actually enforcing against the magnitude of the problem, it's very sad.
My time is up. I'm going to set a good example there, but thank you for that. I think that this is our challenge as a committee, is to see once where we can affect most effectively this flow of funds. With that, I will yield